I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar College and the host of the LURIE Daniel favorite show on SiriusXM. This is a wonderful program put together by my sorors of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated Alumnae chapter, and really gave us an opportunity to talk about the real-world implications of Project 2025 and what it means when a governing body has pooled resources, pooled time, pooled talent, pooled treasure, all for the purposes of undermining the rights that we have fought so hard for. So it was a riveting conversation. Hopefully you all will be able to check it out online if you missed it, but really appreciated being able to gather with the people. My co-panelists, Nick and Dr. BASIL SMIKLE, really
civil rights if it's fully implemented.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. One more time. Good evening.
Good evening.
The first thing that I want to say, and it's probably one of the most important points about Project 2025, it is not a 10-year plan. It's not a 5-year plan. It is a 180-day plan. 180 days after the president is sworn in. And that is assuming that it is Donald Trump, because it is written for the conservatives. So it's important to remember that everything...
Can you repeat that? It was written for and by who?
Written for and by conservatives, and Sister Pascal said this in her opening. It is authored by the Heritage Foundation. And so it's important to note, just to sort of set the stage a little bit, that this is a conservative organization that has written what they will argue is an intellectual, I call it an instruction manual for Donald Trump, for conservatives, should Donald Trump get elected. It is a 180-day plan, so everything that is in that 900-plus page document can be implemented within 180 days. But it's also important to note that it is designed in such a way that if Donald Trump becomes president, he does not have to sign off on it. That there are policies that can be implemented without necessarily him having to sign off. That they can just be done kind of within the agencies from a policy perspective, tweak, so on and so forth. So with that in mind, let me then go directly answer the question. Let's start at the Department of Justice. The ways in which that document talks about the Department of Justice, it suggests that, it says that the president does not have to, it will not be the independent agency that it is typically. That the president will essentially run the Department of Justice, which means the president will run the FBI. And any recommendations that normally would be made, the president can overstep those grounds or those boundaries and actually direct what those agencies and offices are doing. That means he has the ability to target vulnerable communities, including LGBTQ community, including African Americans. As was said earlier in the introduction, everything from DEI, anything related to inclusivity anywhere in the federal government gets completely wiped out. Why is that important? Among other things, I do my research in education policy. They want to eliminate the Department of Education. Why is that important? Because in the plans that we're discussing, you eliminate the Department of Ed, that means everything that we've been talking about over the last few years with respect to school to prison pipeline, there's no more monitoring of that. If you have complaints that the school is harshly or disparately disciplining your children because of their color or LGBTQ status, there would be no recourse to get the federal government to step in to protect those children and families. Slashing healthcare insurance, putting 18 million Americans at risk because they want to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. Remember, they've been doing that for a decade, right? Shutting down access to abortion clinics and healthcare clinics, we know that well, right? But also the very weakening of anti-discrimination laws will create this really profound impact and ripple effect, because what it will end up doing is in any agency that's left, any work that the federal government would do to make sure that states and municipalities are following equal employment opportunity rules, any recourse that you would have would immediately be gone.
But Basil, you touched on the Department of Justice, and I want to kind of get us back to that voting rights piece.
Yes.
you know, because that's really important, and I think that the Department of Justice is where that sits. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, I would say that it started in 2013 when the Supreme Court got into the Voting Rights Act, right? So let's start there. And subsequent to that, what we've seen is over the last year, but more than a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, where there have been over 100 court cases preemptively, so that anything that happens in this election, whatever the turnout, whatever the outcome is that doesn't favor him, is going to be challenged. Should he become president, there will be no sort of stopgap to that challenge, right? And so that's just 100 lawsuits to preempt the outcome. That doesn't include the 200 plus pieces of legislation circulating through state legislatures across the country to suppress the vote. He becomes president, those legislatures pretty much have a free and clear path to pass some of the most restrictive voting rights legislation that we've seen in the country. We talked about Georgia making it illegal at one point for you to serve somebody water if they're standing on line to you, right? So to be clear, from the voting standpoint, it is all about not only making it more difficult for you to vote, but intimidating you on your way to the vote at every step of the process. It is about suppressing, and I'm kind of just a quick political point because I do this. If you notice over the last few months, his numbers haven't grown. He doesn't get above like 47, 48%. So when you ask yourself, why is the race still so close? It's not because he's doing better. It's because everything they're doing, core to their strategy, is to keep us from coming out. So when you think about what happens in January, if this plan can be implemented, it will legalize and give him the authority to do everything that he's doing now without punishment. We'll talk about his people later, but that's just scratching the surface of my comments or whatever.
And I just want to give a shout out to the folks who are joining us from Zoom. Thank you so much for logging in to watch us this evening. We want to shout them out. The next question is for Nick. So tell us, what impact will Project 2025 have on low-income, affordable, and public housing?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me this morning?
Now it's on right. Good evening, everybody. How are you? Feel all right? Good. Great to see you all. So affordable housing, let me just kind of be honest. The conservative movement does not believe in affordable housing. And what it means for Black folk is, according to them, we're on our own. And so with that kind of framework, that document has so many policies in it that will make life harder, both on if you're a renter or a homeowner, or if you're seeking to become a homeowner. And I'll just give you kind of one example. You all may know about this, there's appraisal discrimination. So if you go to try to purchase a home, you have to get an appraiser to value that home before the actual purchase. The document basically says that if there is discrimination in terms of those appraisals, you're on your own. So there's been cases across the country where a Black homeowner, so a family who's already had their home trying to maybe refinance, etc., and they call an appraiser to come in and look at the value, and they'll set the numbers at a certain number. Well, there's been cases where a white family of a similar size, similar income, similar credit rating comes and values the home much higher. So I think I saw one story out of Detroit where a Black family had to call in one of their white friends, and the valuation was like $65,000 more on their single family home. That is an example of the kinds of discrimination that the Office of Project 25 are putting in this document. And I just want to say the document is about I think 900 pages. There are 922. There are so many facets, as Dr. SMIKLE was getting at. It touches on every area of life. So when you all have a second, if you haven't already, come and Google it, check out some of the summaries and really see what the plans are. that document is not meant to support and uplift us. When it comes to housing, we know housing is foundational to everything we do. If we don't have a stable home, we can't take care of the kids. We may struggle to buy food, buy medicine, and so just know that the authors of the document are not looking at the folks in this church thinking, how can we help our folks at Shiloh? They're thinking about how can they help those big developers buy up more big buildings and make profit. So that's what I think it means for Black folks. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you so much for that answer, Nick. LURIE, I know you're going to want to say something because you're my civic sister about the voting and civil rights piece, and I'll let you do that. But I do have a specific question for you. So we're saying in Project 2025, the system is not perfect and we must work to make it better for everyone involved. However, Project 2025 is asking for the increased use of the death penalty in cases that are applicable. What impact could this have on our community? And I'm just going to take moderator's license and say you've already seen a few innocent people be sent to death.
Well,
thank you so much for the question, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be in dialogue with all of you, and I appreciate you in the audience being here. We have to be very clear, and I speak very quickly by nature, so I'll try to slow down, but there's a lot to squeeze in a short bit of time. When we're talking about phrases like "Make America Great Again," we're talking about a return to I predict like a 1750s sort of America, where all of the protections that we have come to rely upon from the civil rights era until present are fundamentally eradicated in the same way that the Voting Rights Act was gutted in 2013 with the Shelby County v. Holder case, in the same way that that really was the culmination of a process that began as soon as the Voting Rights Act was signed into law in 1965. They are perfectly willing, and by they I mean those who are part of the Heritage Foundation and the conservative movement in America, perfectly willing to spend decades working to undermine the rights that we gave our blood, sweat, tears, and very lives for. And so when it comes to the criminal legal system, the expansion of the death penalty is a part of a reshaping of the criminal legal system that would fundamentally alter the balance of power. You can look at what's happening in the state of Louisiana, where I will note there are 900,000 registered Black voters. The current governor of the state of Louisiana won that governorship with less than 500,000 of those votes, which means had Black voters come out, we would not have what I'm about to describe to you. Governor Jeff Landry, who is the governor of the state of Louisiana, has expanded the levels or the types of crimes for which juveniles could be charged as an adult. They have expanded the number of crimes for which parole and early release are no longer applicable. This is the same man who was filmed saying that he could not understand why it was that the good ones get let go. Meaning that if you are in prison and you do well, and you convert, or not convert, you work to really restore your life and restore and repair your relationship, you get early release time. That is no longer a possibility in the state of Louisiana. When it comes to criminal legal reform, what they're essentially planning to do with Project 2025 is fundamentally reverse every single one of the reforms that criminal legal reform activists have been fighting for decades. And because we will also have a legal system that is going to be packed with judges. And I'll remind you that when Donald Trump was in office, more than 25% of the federal judiciary was stacked with judges that he put in place, many of whom agencies like that were designed to evaluate the qualifications of lawyers determined them to be fundamentally unfit to sit in those benches. And yet they sit in those benches and they will have those judicial benches for the rest of their working lives until they either retire or die. When it comes to the criminal legal system, think about the end of qualified immunity. Now, qualified immunity says that sometimes, occasionally, every once in a while, an officer will face some sort of criminal prosecution for the crimes that they commit. We're at least going to investigate. And if you're a Black officer, like the officers in Tennessee who took the life of Tyree Nichols, you might actually get a conviction. Under our Project 2025 criminal legal system, there is full immunity for police actions. It is unquestioned. And because of that, it means that our children, our family members, our community members, as they engage with the police system, have absolutely zero protections. You mentioned the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. If I could just take the liberty, what's important for us to realize is that the 1964 Civil Rights Act was the first of three pieces of legislation. The Voting Rights Act, which came in the following year, and the Fair Housing Act, which came in 1968. These three pieces of legislation collectively are what told Americans, listen, you can be as racist as you want to be at home, but what you can't do is be racist in public. So the Civil Rights Act said you can be racist and you cannot like Black people, but if you have a hotel, you still have to allow them into your space. If you have a store, you can't prevent Black people from coming in simply because they're Black. Under our Project 2025 America, those fundamental freedoms are protected only by the existence of that legislation, which requires judges to interpret the legislation in our favor. Those protections are gone. And so when we're talking about what that means in the workplace, discrimination lawsuits that would typically be under the auspice of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, there is no more Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. There are no more agencies designed to protect our rights. And part of the reason that is because one of the efforts of Project 2025 is based on sort of like a conservative LinkedIn. They have a database where they are currently pulling tens of thousands of resumes. And they don't just want to know your strengths and your weaknesses. They want to know, what kind of a conservative are you? Who are your conservative inspirations? What kind of conservative books have you read? The reason they're doing this is because Schedule F, which my co-panelist mentioned just a moment ago, is an executive order that would allow the wholesale removal of tens of thousands of civil servants. Civil servants are those who work in the government, regardless of what political party is in power. What that means is those civil servants, many of whom are black, and that's where we get the phrase, a good government job, because working in the government was one of the first places where we were able to go and have protections. What that means is that those workers who are there, regardless of which president is in office, would be wholesale removed. And if they aren't wholesale removed at the outset, if they display any sort of disagreement with the policies of the president, because the president now becomes the king, if they disagree with any of those policies, they can be fired at will. And what that means is those tens of thousands of resumes that they're currently cultivating right now will be replacing those civil servants. Now here's the kicker. A lot of folks will say, well, the first time Donald Trump was in office, he didn't do anything. Y'all said the sky was going to fall and the sky's still up in the air. What you doing? Well, that's because there were civil servants in office, tens of thousands of them, who said, wait a minute now, what we ain't going to do is this. What you're asking me to do is illegal. It is unconstitutional. It is a violation of the scope of my power. Well, when you get rid of those people, and you replace them with sycophants, who, according to the third prong of Project 2025, there are 4 pillars. The third pillar is training, and basically a boot camp for conservatives. So when they replace those workers who have decades of experience, the workers that they're going to be bringing in have never worked in government before. But that's okay, because they're going to have Project 2025 boot camp, which will allow them to be extraordinarily effective at implementing the provisions of thereof. That's how you get to all of this happening in 180 days. And if you think your Miranda rights are going to save you, I have a ticket to 1750 to sell you.
Thank you, LURIE. Thank you. So we're going to go to round 2. Nick, so what do you think they mean when they say that they want to reset HUD? This is on page 503 of Project 2025. What would the impact be on NYCHA, Section 8, and other first-time home buyer programs?
I'm glad LURIE mentioned the 68 Fair Housing Act. So I'll just start there. The thinking was, by some of those passing that bill, that there's been historic discrimination when it comes to black folks and housing and land use and that kind of thing. The country is founded with white male landowners being the preference, and everyone else was left out. And so when that law passed, it didn't really give teeth to dismantling that kind of discrimination, really. And so very recently, the Biden administration passed a rule that would actually give teeth to this 1968 Fair Housing Act to require cities and states to study patterns of discrimination among many folks, including black folks across the country, and then require the cities and states to develop plans to end that discrimination. This document says that they are going to wipe out that new rule from Biden and pull back any intention by cities and states to get rid of this discrimination. That's a huge problem. So when I give you the example about the appraisals, that's only one element. You have cities who are primarily responsible for figuring out land use decisions. So where is that big development going to go? How affordable are those units going to be? Are they affordable to folks who live in those neighborhoods or not? And what tends to happen is that brings about what's called displacement and gentrification. So that framework that we know about, they know about it too. They don't care. So they don't believe that government should be in the business of ending housing discrimination. So we all have to be aware that this document is targeting black folks. So we got to be aware of what their plans are and stop it.
Thank you for that answer, Nick. And I know we're going to do another part of the series on economic development, but for Black and brown folks, home ownership is like our #1 pathway to wealth. So if we don't have home ownership, that wealth and that intergenerational wealth we talk about is gone, it's lost.
Can I add one point about home ownership? It's important. So I want everyone here to go to Google and type in the New York City First Time Home Buyer Program. Not many folks know about some of the resources to help you get that down payment or closing costs. The City of New York has a program that if you are in a certain income band, the city will give you $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to cover your down payment cost to get the condo, to get the co-op, or to get the single family home. And one thing that frustrates me about government sometimes, and they don't do a good job of letting folks know what's out there for us. So when we talk about Project 2025 and then trying to scale back our rights, we have to know what's out there right now and take advantage of it. So I really encourage folks who are looking into moving from being a renter to a homeowner and building equity, look into the New York City First Time Home Buyer Program.
Thank you for that information, Nick. Thank you. LURIE, for you, a police state is described as a state whose government institutions exercise an extreme level of control over civil society and liberties. What impact will Project 2025 have on our community, our First Amendment rights, which are freedom of religion, speech, press, the right to peaceably assemble, to petition the government for a redress of grievances?
So I want us to imagine what the world is like without a First Amendment, okay? Because who is speaking is going to be a fundamental part of what sort of rights you get access to. This, to be clear, this is a plan that seeks to reestablish a white supremacist hierarchy explicitly and without fear of legal retribution. So what that means, for example, for freedom for the press. We have heard already that the leading candidate for or the presidential nominee for the Republicans has said that if he becomes empowered and in office, that he is going to basically file lawsuits and jail those in the media who have spoken out against him. And I gotta be honest with you, in addition to running the Center for Law and Social Justice, I do host the daily show on SiriusXM, and we are having conversations about what it's going to mean should he win. We are a very proactively freedom approaching radio station, and it's a national show. What sort of bullseye do we come under if we are continuing to speak truth to power? So there is no freedom for the press if that press is critical of the conservative movement or Donald Trump. When it comes to freedom of religion, there are some of the folks who have contributed to the authorship of Project 2025, some who are part of the Heritage Foundation and other very conservative organizations, because while the Heritage Foundation is the leading institution that drafted this mandate, it is supported by tons of other conservative organizations that are extraordinarily well funded. Some of their executive directors and some of their thought leaders have said, we can't require you to actually believe in white Christian nationalism. Here, I didn't say Christianity. I said white Christian nationalism, and the word Christian is doing the least amount of work in that phrase. We can't require you to believe it, but we can order you to walk in the mandates thereof. And they're not talking, I was raised in a church, they're not talking about black Christianity. And they don't see us as people who would participate in a religion equally to them. And so the religious mandates or the religious freedoms that we have would come under fire. You may have seen some of the white conservative pastors who are online right now explicitly calling out the black church for, quote, encouraging the black church to vote for that woman, to vote for her. If you are a Christian body of Christ, if you are in any form of religious practice that is not in alignment with upholding the white Christian nationalist mandate that this project seeks to implement, you will not be able to freely participate in your religious exercises. The freedom of the ability to freely associate, the right to protest, these things do not exist in a world where there is a Project 2025 America. Now, I do tend to think in horribles. I'm a lawyer. We're trying to think about all the worst possible things that can happen. But we've already begun to see what that looks like. When a particular religious body takes a hold of government, for example, and that particular religious body has perspectives on reproductive health care, you can outlaw entire medical procedures that can save lives simply because you have the votes in Congress to do it and the courts who will support you. And there was another part of the question, the first part before the First Amendment. What impact on our community broadly?
Yes.
Okay, so how many of you know somebody who's 60 years or older? I'm being a little facetious. That person's older than integration. They're older than integration. And integration, for those of us who are Gen X or younger, when I was a child, my parents and my uncles and aunties used to make me watch documentaries like Eyes on the Prize. That's why I'm so glad now. But they would make us watch these documentaries, and I remember thinking, wow, how terrible must it have been to live when there was openly hostile and explicit racism. Whew, so glad that's over. We have new battles to fight. Well, friends, if we no longer have the 1964 Civil Rights Act being enforced, that means public displays of discrimination are back. So let's go back to lunch counters. Okay, let's go back to the fight to integrate buses, to be able to go to a hotel. We're back in that legal framework. If we no longer have the Voting Rights Act, then we're back in the world where Medgar Wiley Evers from the university where I am based, the Center for Law and Social Justice, is back to being assassinated in his streets or in his driveway. If we don't have these protections, which are younger than many of the people that we know in our lives and can speak to today. My ultimate concern is that we who are Gen X or younger, and some of the younger boomers as well, we're not built for that. And by that I mean, and there was a time when prior to integration, I'm not one of those folks who romanticizes, well, before integration, we this, that, and the other, although there are some elements that certainly could be romanticized. However, we at least had institutions that were wholly owned by us to the extent that that could even be possible in a racist society such as this, that could sustain community because we understood there were no protections. There was no one else to lean upon. Since that time, we have chosen a pathway of integration that also brought with it the abandonment of many of the institutions that previously were held in our hands. So where are our children going to apply for jobs when corporations are no longer required to even consider them? They can go back to the days when discrimination in the hiring process is wholly acceptable. What Black-owned institutions are they going to apply to work at? Where Black-owned banks, thank God for Carver, thank God for One United, but what Black-owned fiscal institutions do we still sustain and own and invest in that will be able to absorb that? Our capacity to absorb a return to pre-civil rights era reality is not what it would need to be in order to ensure that we end up unscathed. And I would just like to say, this ain't the first time this has happened. There's a brief period following the Civil War known as Reconstruction. Reconstruction was an amazing period. It was a time where formerly enslaved Africans were able to virtually, not fully, but almost eradicate illiteracy. We were able to build towns. We had almost more people in elected office at the local, state, and federal level. Some might say that we do to this day. That number is a little debatable, but we can quibble with that later. But we were able to sustain ourselves and build for ourselves, and it was a beautiful moment that lasted just a pinch over a decade. And what came after was the wholesale eradication of every single one of those rights. We had a Civil Rights Act in the 1860s. We had the Ku Klux Klan Act in the 1860s. We had the 13th Amendment, which kind of abolished slavery, unless you were convicted of a crime. Abraham Lincoln explains that to us. We had the 14th Amendment, which gave us citizenship based on our birthright. How closely do you think that rule is going to be upheld in Project 2025 America? I know there's a whole lot of folks who claim that they are protected from that sort of discrimination because they can trace their lineage back decades and generations. They don't care about your genealogical record. They kept excellent records of us when we were owned by them, so you being able to recount who you were and your generations going back means nothing to people who built an entire economy based on owning our genealogy. And so if we don't have the 15th Amendment, which ensures we're not going to be discriminated against at the polls, and then you end up without a Voting Rights Act in the 1900s, my friends, we should also consider what it might mean in the worst case scenario, and God forbid this should happen, but what might it mean to have to create an underground railroad in the Project 2025? What might that look like? We should think about these things because in 920 some odd pages, they certainly have thought about how to recreate the conditions that would make such a decision necessary.
Wow. That's a powerful thought. Right here in Harlem.
Dr. SMIKLE. So the question says, but I'm like, they did this already. Project 2025 removes Supreme Court guardrails that protect against abuse of power of the executive branch of the government. So I'm going to add that the Supreme Court kind of already removed some guardrails of the executive, which is the president, if you don't know your branches. What does this mean for our community and our democracy?
Well, I think we talked around that. So let me frame it a little differently, if you don't mind. There are a lot of folks that say, we have to vote and vote a certain way because we want to keep the country from going down this path. The country's already there. And we've been there for a minute. The country's already there. And if you want any sort of window into understanding the depths of their thinking with respect to whether it's people of color, whether it's women, and to my D9 sisters, I think it's important to speak to this example. In that document, they have said that they are interested and will do everything that they can in all 50 states to abolish no-fault divorces. Now, why is that important? That's important because as you talk about going backwards, there was a time when you could not get divorced as a woman without your husband's permission. And what they're saying now, even if you're in an abusive relationship, that we're gonna go back to that.
That's right.
Do you think, just how devious is that? Why would somebody sit there and just think of it, right? Given where we are, if you're a Gen Xer or a boomer or whatever the case is, who is sitting down in this country and saying, you know what? I want to go back to a time where if I get married, my wife can't divorce me without my permission. But there are a lot of people thinking about that. And there are a lot of people campaigning on that. The vice presidential candidate on that side was asked directly if he felt that this was good policy, and he said yes.
And that's just what he said. That's just what he said.
And that's what,
We're not partisan.
no, this is what he said. No, I don't know, this is reporting.
Yes.
Reporting.
Reporting.
Yeah, reporting. And what's important to know is that this is not just a document with words on a page. There were a lot of people funding the mobilization to put this in place and to get people thinking in a certain mindset. So when you talk about the Supreme Court, the way I like to think about it is that's not the beginning, that's sort of the end. That's sort of the pinnacle. We have to go back and really consider that these plans didn't happen because Kamala Harris was running for president. These are at least a decade or more in formation. So let me just talk a little bit about that. When Barack Obama, first of all, anytime he made progress, there's always backlash. You know that, right? When Barack Obama became president, in those 8 years, Democrats lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures nationally. 1,000. So they were flipping state legislatures. So when they talk now about setting
You guys, I just want to stop you. This is the importance of voting in every single election. All of our elected officials are important.
By the way, state and local elections have the lowest turnout.
Right.
But the most policy that affects your day-to-day life is at the state and local level, where the most turnout. Just remember that. They flipped all of these state legislatures. So when they talk now about sending it to the states, that's why. Because they planned it that way. So as they're writing these documents and saying, we're going to do
And
this,
that's
we're going to
just
do
one thing on the states, and I'm having a trifecta, which she can explain later. You touched on them not worrying about getting more people to vote, but doing things where they can challenge. So can you hit on the role that states could play if he challenged? You know what? I mean, I'm sorry. I got you digging deep. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's all right. That's what we do, right? That's what we do.
Yes.
No, so as you know, there are federal election laws, but really elections govern state to state, right? So the fact that you can flip state legislatures, and you can do what we saw in Georgia, because boards of elections have both Democratic and Republican representatives. So you get a point. So just think about the fact that that he's not president at this time, but he has people that are loyal to him at every level of government. So you have Board of Elections commissioners in the state of Georgia that are loyal to him, not to the job, but to him, saying, now we're going to make it more difficult for you to come out and cast your vote. In fact, when you cast your vote, even though the machine can count it, we're going to count all of them by hand. Because why? Because the longer it takes, the more fraud they can claim. And then they go to a court. But guess what? They put that judge on that bench. And then they go on appeal. Guess what? Somebody that they like is sitting on the Court of Appeals. Well, let's take it to the Supreme Court. Guess what? That's why I say it's not the beginning. It's the end. They make sure that whatever it is you do at the grassroots level, if you are lucky enough to get it that far, we'll stop it dead in its tracks.
And what about the importance of the House? Hashtag January 6th.
What?
The importance of the House, January 6th.
Well, look. Look, I just look, I always say, I was at the Million Man March. And not only did we not storm the Capitol, I think we cleaned up after us. If we had ever done that, if somebody that looked like me or that looked like us ever just went through a locked door, we would never be called patriots. I guarantee you that. We would have been in the gallows that were on the lawn that day. I say that because, and to make this point, he has said that he will pardon or would like to pardon all of the folks who were convicted. Mind you, over about 1,000 people that have been pardoned. I am not as concerned about who he'll pardon. I'm concerned about who he's going to lock up. That means folks like us, like you, who are on the radio, on TV, we teach in a classroom. They're going to make it much more difficult to say the things that we say in our day-to-day lives, to teach the things that we want to teach. And if you don't believe me, look at Florida. We've had to lift up librarians because they're being threatened, because they can't put certain books on their shelves, right? How do we get to a point where we're threatening and criminalizing librarians and teachers? And it goes to your point. Their attempt is to create a singular American narrative. And that singular narrative does not include us. In fact, it dilutes us. In fact, it waters us down. And even if it does include us, which it really doesn't, it's meant for them to define what it is to be a citizen and a patriot, not for you to be the author of your own narrative. Every other group gets to do that except us. And so when we look at what's happening city to city, state to state, the infrastructure has been laid for decades for them to be at this place right here, right now, all boiling down to this one election. So if you have concerns about whether or not a January 6th will happen again, my statement has always been, if he gets elected, January 6th is not going to be confined to the Capitol. It is going to be at City Hall. It's going to be in Harlem.
Wow.
It's going to be in front of your school and perhaps even this church. Because we're going to be doing stuff we shouldn't be doing, which is congregating and planning.
But he was trying to stop a thing, and that's really what I was getting to. January 6th, he was trying to stop the certification of the election by the House of Representatives.
Oh, well, listen.
Also on the ballot.
He didn't just try to stop the certification. He sat by while his vice president almost got hanged and did nothing. So, and look, I was an elector in 2016. I was jokes. I got to vote for president. Y'all didn't vote for president. I actually got to, because I was, you know what I mean? Because I was like, you know, I don't know, I'm supposed to be silent. So yeah, so I was an elector. I went to Albany. I cast the ballot for officially in December for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And what I remember during that time, there were a lot of people saying, you know, Donald Trump won, don't cast your ballot for Hillary Clinton, and whatever. They were like trying to get to me and get to other people to do the right thing so that she wouldn't even get votes in the Electoral College. They are intent upon, and this is the point I was making initially, they are intent upon making sure he wins. Let's just be clear about that. So all of those 100 preemptive lawsuits are to make sure she doesn't win. Those 200 plus bills that are circulating in state legislatures are to make sure that it is more difficult to cast your vote. They're doing everything in their power so that he wins and that the only person certified on that day is he.
And if she doesn't get 270, if neither of them get to 270 electoral votes, the decision about who becomes president is something that's voted on by the members of the House. And because of the way the House is currently constituted, it is in Republican hands. It's nonpartisan, we're talking politics. And that means Mike Johnson's Republican majority would be the ones determining who would be in the presidency, and then the Senate would get to determine who is going to be the vice president. That is not a road I want to go down.
Wow.
It's all part of the plan. That's why I have to hammer that home. This is part of the plan, and we're not part of that plan. So here's our plan. That's the next one.
Yes, I was gonna say that gets into the next question. Nick, tell us what we're gonna do. What can our community do about these housing?
I just want to vote now.
I think that's right. Go ahead. Before that, I just want to make sure we know who and what. So I just want to read a quote from the founder of this whole thing. His name is Paul Dans, and about this project, he says, quote, Republicans, and I'm quoting, so I'm not recommending their party here, but I'm sorry, Republicans and conservatives have not stood up in the face of cancel culture, woke culture, and these Marxist Saul Alinsky attacks. Cancel culture. So saying that we want to end discrimination in housing and employment is woke. Cancel culture. We're still good? Okay, we're still good. Thank you. And also, there were 140 people who worked in the previous Trump White House that helped write this document. There were 6 cabinet secretaries that helped write this document.
Who's cabinet secretary?
Trump's cabinet. Yeah, exactly. There are his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, that means the top staffer in the White House, helped to write this document. Stephen Miller, an advisor of his, helped to write it. And they spent 3 days in January 23, speaking of January 6th, writing this document. And I just want to really outline a few more things that could happen if they implement this document in full. They would stop efforts to lower prescription drug prices. They would limit access to food assistance or SNAP. They would eliminate Head Start, early education program that serves 1 million of our children per year. They would restrict access to a woman's reproductive rights. They've already done it with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And no matter where you stand, it's a privacy right. In other words, the government should not be in your bedroom, your business, exactly. It would cut Medicare Advantage and Medicare, which primarily affects our senior citizens. It would expose about 400,000 children who are in foster care to increased risk of discrimination. It would deny students in 25 states and DC access to student loans. It would cut what's called the Public Service Loan Program. That simply means if you spend 10 years working at a nonprofit or for the public, right now you can have your student loans canceled. The document says, that's right, the document says gone. So we really have to know who is writing this and what's in it. So again, I recommend that folks Google this document and know what the stakes are in this election.
What can we do to prevent or to oppose, to stop these things from becoming law or implemented, these Project 2025 ideas?
So one of the things that one of the authors of the project has said is that their plan is candidate agnostic. I mean, they don't care who's in office. He could win, she could win, doesn't matter to them. This is what they're, the same way that they took a 50-year time span to eradicate reproductive access to reproductive health care, the same way they took a 60-plus year effort to eradicate the protections of the Voting Rights Act. This is their vision for the country. They are funded, they are organized, they live and breathe this stuff. And a lot of us are doing what we can to simply survive. And one of the things we have to be clear about is that when we talked about the civil rights era, the 1965, the Civil Rights, Voting Rights, Fair Housing Act, those acts were pieces of legislation. They're not permanent parts of the Constitution. And if you align the right number of stars, and friends, the stars are aligning, you can eradicate those protections wholly. We have to, I asked earlier, how many of you know someone 60 or older? If you know someone 50 or older, they're older than a woman's right to get a line of credit without a husband or a brother or a father giving her permission. 1974 is when we get the right to open up bank accounts on our own. So this is not far off.
Wow.
And one of the things we have to recognize is that voting is
Knowledge is
absolutely
power.
fundamentally part of this process. However, voting alone is not going to be enough because they're not voting alone. They're planning, they're organizing, they're building coalition, they're engaging. They have an entire group of them called the Theo Bros who believe that a woman's place is making sandwiches for the man as he goes out and conquers. They don't want the 19th Amendment, women. They don't think that giving women access to the right to vote was a good thing because they want the man to be the one who votes. And if you think I'm joking, there's a number of stories circulating right now where elderly white women have said things like, my husband just died, I'm gonna be able to wear lipstick now, and I'm gonna vote for the first time. My husband just died, I'm gonna finally learn how to drive, and because of that, I'm gonna be able to be independent. This is today, and and when we had the Win with Black Women and the 44,000 who answered the call, and then a few days later, white women got on the call, I listened. You would not believe how many of them live in abject fear of letting their husbands know how they want to vote. They talked about when they would tell their husbands, I'm talking today, we're going to the book club. And the book club is the back of somebody's restaurant or someone's house where they can do political organizing in ways that their husband do not approve of. This is what they are living and breathing. And so I say that to say, we are going to have to begin exercising the muscles that unfortunately, for good reason or bad, have atrophied since the era of the civil rights movement. And those muscles are kujichagulia, self-determination.
Thank you.
Unity, ujima, collective work and responsibility, ujamaa, cooperative economics, kuumba, creativity, nia, purpose, and imani, faith. I want us to imagine, and this is an exercise I always encourage people to do, what would you do if in 2 weeks we found out there are no more services going to be provided from the government? So the childhood education programs, everything that Nick just mentioned, every single social service that we rely on. Think about that. If they decide to turn off the water to your neighborhood, where's your fresh water coming from? If they decided that they were no longer going to allow trucks to bring groceries into your neighborhood, where's your food coming from? I'm asking these questions because there were times when these were things we confronted and had answers to. So I say that to say, Marcus Garvey, one of my favorite quotes from him is, what Africans have done, Africans can do. So I am very confident in our ability to build that muscle. But we have to begin thinking not just in terms of educating our children so that they can go off to a good school and learn how to speak in ways that are a little bit different than perhaps they might speak at home, and learn how to interview well and make white people feel comfortable so they can get really good jobs working for them and make really great white money, and then they can buy houses in white communities where the neighbors really don't want them to be there, but they would have voted for Obama 3 times if they could. And so I want us to think about reframing our approach to education. If you are a black child being educated,
Thank you.
by the time you're done, you don't know how to use your education to improve the black community. What good was that?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
What would it mean if the solutions we are relying upon require people who have a multi-century history of being barely able to recognize our humanity except for the ways that they could exploit and benefit from it? What does it mean to have solutions that do not require white permission, white sanction, white funding, white votes, their inability to veto? What would it look like if we were really and truly on our own? Because if this project is implemented, and again, candidate agnostic, they don't care who's in office, this is their vision for America. What is our vision for a kujichagulia existence so that we are insulated from these things? And I'm not just talking about owning a bunch of black businesses that we cannot protect from the military violence that will come. And we have to be clear about that because Reconstruction wasn't ended nicely. It was a brutal, violent, racial, terroristic moment in our history. And if what Marcus Garvey said is true, because if what Africans have done, Africans can do, that's not just true for us. They are repeating playbooks. They're opening books that they have perfected for centuries, and we are trying to build a concept of freedom that we've never known here. So part of our effort to be whole and heal build from this is to, one, reclaim our righteous mind, as Denzel's character said in The Great Debaters, but we have to begin thinking about the ways in which we are addicted to the ability for people outside of our community to provide for us our housing, our jobs, our food, our ability to send mail, our sanitation. Everything that we rely upon largely comes from a relationship that is based on people who do not have a commitment to our long-term sustainability. And we got to do a lot of soul searching, but we ain't got a lot of time because it's a 180-day plan. It's a 180-day plan. So, if anything, there's an elder of mine who always quibbles with this quote. I believe this was also Marcus Garvey, that says, if all else fails to organize the people, conditions will. And I used to say that rally, but it's not, whatever the conditions are, we're going to organize if the conditions are bad. No, because a lot of us are sometimes so beaten down by conditions that organizing is the last thing we have the capacity to do.
Amen.
I was in a room recently with some very wealthy black people who make more money than Black Jesus. And one of the things they were talking about was, well, we don't know what to do. We want to do a mentorship program. Should we all just mass retire? I said, listen, I need you to keep making that good white people money. And I need you, instead of just going to jobs every day and coming home and bemoaning the fact that you are utterly useless to your people, other than those who are related to you and can tap into your pockets, I need you to redirect them resources to the organizations that are doing it. I need the churches to continue doing what we are doing here and returning to that space where there is organizing actively happening. I need the D9, and I love the D9, especially down to see the things so already incorporated. But we're gonna have to do what I'm seeing a lot of folks do, which is ain't no more strolling until we've done the volunteering. Ain't no more strolling. Next, the Black professional organizations, both those that are above ground and those that are on the corners. Because the corners are some of the best organized institutions that we have. You know. We need to be in different sort of community. We have to return to a different type of community. We're going to have to tap into a different level of ancestral commitment. And that means we are going to have to, those of us who can, live, breathe, and have hearts beating for how we can figure out what our purposes are, figure out how to align them with the needs of the people in our community, and then walk in it with your back straight.
All right.
Think about it. How many of us are even praying for the end of white supremacy? How many of our churches are using that spiritual? We got spiritual power for everything. How many white demons or demons of white supremacy have we cast out of the lives of our people? Let's begin intentionally thinking about things we have put to the side and say, we're going along to get along. Listen, you know what it is? You got to stop me so well. You know what I think we can do it. That's the most important thing. These are things that can be done.
All right.
Because we want to get to that Q&A from the audience. So, is there an alternative to Project 2025? Did somebody write something for us?
Nobody wrote it. I mean, look, you got the Center for American Progress is there. There are a number of think tanks, the parties do it, the House Dems are doing something. There isn't the kind of broad, there isn't the kind of extensive, really detailed, really strategic document like Project 2025. But I'll call attention to a couple of quick things so we can get to questions. The first is, actually, the Democratic Party actually does have a platform. They do that every convention. They actually have a platform, and you can go online and you can find it. If you would consider that the alternative, and if you want to know what you're voting for, that is the document. There's another side to that. When I got into politics, so I'm thankful for raising Garvey. One of my relatives was a co-founder of the NICOLE, Thomas SMIKLE. It's on the letter, very proud of that. So we're Jamaican, so I'm a Garvey. This conversation was always in the family about what we do together and collectively. And one of the things that I raised about where we are right now, how we can move forward, is, and I know we talk about voting, and I have issues with voting, not voting with the Democratic Party itself, and I'll tell you why. Not because I used to run the state party, so but you know, even families have their quibbles with jobs, right? But one of the things that I had to check myself with is when I got active in the party is because I saw Jesse on TV in 84 and 88 saying the party's not being responsive to people that look like him, which meant look like me. And I was like, man, if he could do that, then I could go and sort of assert myself in this thing, right? And David Dinkins becomes mayor, and Bill Clinton, I think, was my first presidential vote. And then you get the Alexis Herman in labor, the Roger Slater in transportation, and Jan Moore, African American woman, was the White House political director. So I thought that my vote actually meant something. And that is, as flawed as the institutions are, having the right person in office makes the difference. But if you're under 30 right now, you don't think that at all, generally. There are a lot of young voters, and actually many older voters, that don't even think the institutions work anymore. So it doesn't matter who's running them. They're just so fundamentally broken that we need to start over first and rebuild something else. They also believe that the Democratic Party is not the party that you belong to. It's really just about the candidate, which was very different from how I grew up in party politics. So my point in saying this is that we also have to have a different conversation with people about why it's important to vote right here. It's not just about being part of this party. It's not just about saying, oh, if she wins, which we've kind of been saying, but it's that, oh, if she wins, then this is going to change and this is going to change, because a lot of folks don't believe that it will change. But we have to think long term, and I think that's very critical. I'd also say that, two more quick things. One, that not voting is not the protest that you think it is.
It's not the flex.
It is not. And I will talk to you about this from the perspective of someone that used to run a party. If you don't vote, we know you don't vote. We have access to every voter in the state, and by extension across the country. We can go back at least 15 years to determine your voting history. Thanks to Obama and the way he ran his campaign, we have what we call enhancements. So we can tap all of this really great information onto your name. If we can't tell what race and ethnicity you are, there's a great little algorithm that can help us determine that. We can figure out, based on your history, where you live, get a sense of what you do, kind of community you're in. We can determine, are you likely to volunteer, are you likely to give money? Thanks to the technology, we have a way to figure out, based on your searches, what you care about. We can even model you as a voter based on the apps on your phone. So if you think that your vote doesn't count, think again. Because we know exactly who you, I don't mean to scare you.
No, and I was going to say, that's about,
It's scary.
an educated voter.
It's scary.
Not about who you vote for, but it's about creating a history, a voting history, so that elected officials and candidates come to your community.
Right.
It's not about who, because they're not coming to a community that does not vote.
That's
You
right.
don't vote to a non-factor.
That's right. By the way, if you're not using your phones, turn off your phones so you can't track them. But I'm sorry. But we can get a lot of really good raw data about who you are and how you might vote. So when you don't vote, we know that. And to Nikki's point, if you're a campaign that has limited time, limited resources, they've got to spend all their money before the end of the by-election. They've got to spend all their money. So if I don't have a lot of money and I don't have a lot of time, and I'm trying to figure out who I need to talk to, am I going to go to the person that didn't vote for the last 5 years? Or am I going to go to the first person that voted every election in the last 5 years? That's just the reality of the business of politics and running for office. And so that's why when we say you got to vote and people say, well, I don't know. We know if you don't. Not voting is not the flex you think it is. The last point I'll make. I had a lot to say, maybe some of it privately, about what Obama was saying with respect to black men companies. And I'll just say this. Do not ever think that black men are not civically engaged. We care about our communities too. And in fact, one of the things that I have said frequently on camera when Kamala Harris elevated to the top of the ticket. There was a pastor in Houston, Texas, Reverend T.K. Ayers. He gets up to the pulpit and says, you know what? I wasn't really sure about her, but I'll be, if I, as a black man, let an unqualified white man talk badly about her.
qualified.
And if, my point is that no matter what you can tell a brother about the party, about him on the other side, or even Project 25, you go to that brother and say, you've got to protect us, you've got to speak up for us. I guarantee you that brother will step up to the plate. I don't like the scapegoating of them or even us if this thing doesn't go the way we might want it to go. Don't blame us. Don't blame us. Blame the people who wrote that document. Blame the people who are bent on instilling white supremacy in this country. Blame it on the folks who are flipping legislatures and wanting to make sure that all of the policies we care about get dismantled piece by piece, bit by bit. Our brothers are engaged.
Yeah.
Our sisters are engaged. We are a community, and if we need to come and do more of this and speak to the village and come out of our bubbles and speak to the village like we're doing today, we'll do this every day, all day, for the next 11 days. And the last point, it can't stop on election day. Because their plans don't stop on election day. They are day to day, year to year, for the next 10 years. All of our plans tend to go from cycle to cycle. We've got to have this conversation up to election day and the day after until the next one, because we can't let this thing fall through.
Thank you. That's a note to end on. And I'm taking
So hi, my name is Zenzile Tunge. I'm from Harlem, New York City. I recently graduated from Howard University with a double master's in social work and business administration. I think tonight's conversation was wonderful. I think they had many points in educating us about Project 2025. I think there's a lot of mass information on social media right now, and it's hard to detect real information from fake information. We're in the digital age of a lot of information, and a lot of things are coming at us, but a lot of us are not doing the research. We're hearing things on TikTok and Instagram, and we're running with narratives without fact-checking things for ourselves or being involved in community engagement and learning amongst the elders and thinking, oh, politics is not my forte. Politics inform everything, from social work to business to anything we do in society. Whether you feel like in the past our vote didn't matter, start voting today. Like it doesn't hurt to vote, and it affects people. If you're in a more fortunate position, it still affects people that are in less positions than you. So at least think about them when it comes to voting in this new election coming and approaching, because oftentimes they're like, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm living in my mansion, or I got my degrees, I have my connections, I'm fine. But think about our brothers and sisters who are still in poverty or are still in unfortunate situations. So that's what I have to say.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. No.